welcome back to the channel. I realize it's been a while since I've done a whiskey review or drank on camera at all, so I figure what better way to reinitiate the video graft inebriation except with having Miracle on 1911th Street, which is a limited edition blend from the 1911 Syndicate. Full disclosure, I know Jake from the 1911 Syndicate. I also know Tim Hewells, who owns the Whiskey Blendery, where this was blended up here in Texas, and I was involved in the actual blend. So it's going to be less of a review on the whiskey, as it is some thoughts that it got me thinking about on, that quest for the perfect do-all rifle. So before we get into it, what is the Whiskey Blendery and what is this blend? It is an amazing blend of two different whiskeys, and as we were in there, the cool thing about the blender is you go in and you get to taste test different whiskeys and bourbons that are at different ages out of the barrel and get to create what suits your palate. So when I was in there with Jake, we were sitting down and we tried to find the perfect blend of flavors that somebody who was newer to whiskey would really enjoy, and some people that are more, seasoned would also appreciate. So finding that perfect flavor profile that suited the newbie, like for example, when I was a newbie, I used to think TX whiskey was great, at 80 proof. Now it just tastes like, sweetened piss water to me. So no offense TX, but that's what the standard whiskey blend that you have does. So for me, stuff that's lighter is not what I really enjoy, but a newer person wants that. Whereas people who, have been drinking whiskey for a while or, have tried a lot of different things, they're going to like single barrels or, whatever their preference is. But a lot of people like barrel strength. For me, that's what I like. So things that are in the 115 proof. So we spent a lot of time trying different blends and getting the proof just to the point where we thought that it was going to be good for a new whiskey drinker, but also an experienced drinker would like it. And then it was finished off in a maple syrup barrel. So you get that maple on it, and oh boy, is this good. But look at the color. This is the color that you get from it. It's an amazing blend, very drinkable, has a lot of different tasting notes on it. You'll find what you taste and smell out of it, but the finish is awesome. The maple is not overpowering. So somebody like me who doesn't like things finished in port barrels, like High West does a lot of finishing in different fruity barrels that I don't like. This is not overpowering so that you lose the flavor of the whiskey in the process. But we spent hours blending whiskeys with different flavor profiles, trying to get the proof just right. We settled on right around 104 to find that perfect whiskey. And it made me think about how much time and how often I've been asked the question, what is your do-all rifle? What's that perfect go-to gun that's going to do everything? And I'm sorry guys, but like Santa Claus, like the perfect do-it-all gun doesn't exist. But I will say that I've spent a good amount of time finding my go-to gun, which is going to be the gun that is my primary weapon, and I recommend that everybody spend the time, the money, and training to go through and develop your go-to gun, that primary gun that you're most comfortable with, in the setup that you believe will serve you in 95% of occasions. So here's mine. This is my go-to gun, which would be my primary weapon for training. If I were to grab one gun off the wall, this would be my go-to, and it is a Type A 11.5 Pro. So it's 11.5 inch SBR, and this is actually the first gun I received from Type A 2 years ago, and it's gone through a lot of different iterations. So I'll go through the process of building this gun out, what I've done in the past that worked, what didn't, and what got me to where I am now, and hopefully you'll glean some information if you've looked at any of the products that I've got on here right now or anything in the past. Maybe you'll think about it and think about your gun a little bit more in terms of usability, as opposed to I need that one, holy grail gun that does everything. So when I first got this gun, it was a pistol with folder. So it had the SBA 3 pistol brace on it and the Law tactical folder. Also, it was a shorter handguard. I'll talk about that process. They didn't have the longer handguards that fit the 11.5 back at the time. So that was what I had. Also, I had a Dead Air Sandman S on the front, and I had a Primary Arms 1-6 LPVO and an offset red dot. I used a pistol red dot and SRO. So let's talk about how that did and didn't work. A lot of times people will get their setup and they'll go to the range and maybe even spend some time on a flat range with it. But what I found is to really get to know your setup, to get into situations where you're doing drills that you don't normally do as repetition. So I try to go to at least 2 courses per year with vetted instructors that I trust to get my guns out there, to be doing different types of drills and using them in ways that I don't normally do, to see how the whole process works out. So the first course I went to with the original setup was a 3-day Costa Ludus, so Chris Costa carbine course. And if you know anything about Chris, there's going to be a lot of stories, a lot of fun times, a lot of unusual situations that you're shooting in, and a lot of shooting. He likes high round count courses, so it's like 2,500 rounds. Very, very good, but I very quickly realized that my setup was just too darn heavy. So my LPVO, while not extremely heavy, the extra weight for the amount that I was actually using it versus the red dot didn't make sense. So for me, shooting anywhere from 0 out to 300 yards, a red dot with a magnifier was going to be the way to go. Secondly was my choice of backup dot. The SRO is a great pistol optic, but I have broken them on pistols many times before. I don't know what I was thinking putting it on a rifle and thinking that it was going to work. It did survive that weekend, but just barely. So SROs are a no-go. And in my opinion, on a rifle, I would like to have an enclosed emitter no matter what, because the thing's swinging around on your chest, it's hitting stuff. So for me, enclosed emitters are the way to go on rifles. And the last thing that I found was the pistol brace. So pistols are great, braces are great, but when you're shouldering it over and over again, the pistol braces are not meant to replace stocks, hence the ATF's issue. So I really wanted a stock, so it immediately, I got an SBR lower, swapped it out, so I could put a stock on it, and I'm an SOT, so I didn't have to pay that $200 unconstitutional tax stamp, but I do have to pay my SOT every year and keep my FFL active. So that was initially what I needed to do to get the weight where I wanted it and to get the shoulder feel exactly where I wanted it. So I ended up taking off the SRO and the LPVO and replacing it with a red dot, not this dot, but it was a different Hollow Sun with the ACSS reticle. So it was a Hollow Sun red dot with the ACSS reticle on these Unity mounts. Added the riser here with an aim point 3x magnifier, and I wanted to stick with the ACSS because that's what was in my 1:6, and the reticle is very cool for distancing your shots. There's a lot of good information that's in it. It really helps you with your holds up close as well. Getting that height over bore, you can actually kind of cheat the system with a 50-yard zero of where you want to put, the dots on the ladder there to get good hits inside of 50 yards, and then obviously, out to 200 and beyond. So I ran that setup for a while and it worked very well on the flat range, could get very good hits until I went to my next course with Bob Keller at Gamut Resolutions, I believe it is. Awesome trainer, really focuses a lot on basics and ready up drills and basics of marksmanship. So I took that setup to his course for 2 days and came away with some new understandings. The first was to change my sling location. So originally I would mount my sling as far forward and as far back as I could on my gun in order to have it really sit nice and tight against my body and not swing and hit me in the nuts. Also, I always run my guns suppressed, so having that suppressor not come and swing and hit my legs was nice. I find with having the sling as far apart as possible, you can do that. However, Bob is very big on shooting offhand. So when I had my sling set up in the original 2-point position, when he'd have me switch over to my left side, right there, my sling would get caught up when it was mounted back here. It'd get caught up on my neck a lot, and shooting offhanded was difficult, and transitions became very tough. So Bob is a big believer in single point slings. I am a big believer in not having my nuts hit with guns. So I went and kind of split the baby, and I moved my rear point up forward from back here on the stock. And then my front mount point, I started using cable locks that just go into whatever rail system you've got there. I moved it from the front to here to bring those in a little bit better. So changing the sling location was the first thing that I did. And also I realized that the gun was still too heavy. I had a light on the front at the time. I had a Surefire Scout, and then I changed to the Cloud Defensive Rain. This is the Rain 1.0 on here. But I still had the Dead Air Sandman S with the Chemo adapter on the front. And 2, I think it might have even been 3 days of ready up drills, you start to realize that the more weight you have out at the front of the gun when you're swinging it up and down, it's going to make it a little more difficult once you have that momentum to get it to stop. So a lighter front end is better. Also, I was going to be mounting a PEC, so I wanted to make sure that I had as little weight as possible. I ditched the Sam-S, which is a great can, for the Helios, the CGS Group Helios Direct Thread. I'll do a full review on this soon. But doing that saved me 11 ounces out at the front of my gun that I could then put some back into with the PEC and not have it get too ungainly up at the front. And the last thing that I did was add a hand stop here. Also, the rail at the time, I think, switched from the old Type A 11.5-inch rail to the new one, which is a little bit longer. But I added a hand stop, which is, I think it's just a Magpul hand stop, just so that I've got something, a little more real estate to pull into my shoulder and keep the gun stable. So from my second course, that's what I learned. Ran that for 8 months until my most recent course and had some more epiphanies there. So the last course that I ran was a couple weeks ago with Aaron Cowan from Sage Dynamics. It was a low light instructor training course to get certified as a low light instructor with him. And I ran the setup almost identical to this. The main thing was that I had the ACSS reticle on the red dot. And I'll tell you right now that during the day, the ranging and the donut of death, all that stuff in those red dot reticles is amazing. Once you get into low light situations, the less stuff you have bombarding you, because you've got lights, you could have lasers, there's a lot of stuff going on. The less stuff that you have in your brain and in your eye line when you're shooting, the better. So I found that the ACSS reticle at night was having a problem. So I switched over to just a standard Holosun red dot. A lot of guys were running Holosuns. A lot of guys I trust that are on some pretty legit teams. So I do trust Holosun rifle dots now. So I switched over to just a standard red dot from Holosun. And there's another thing that I'm going to be working on, which is going to be my light setup. So I currently have the Rain 1.0, which is a great light. Lots of power, you know, look up the horsepower, the candela and the lumens and all that stuff. It's a great light. I like the fact that the company has a lot of really good morals behind what they do, and they don't really get into, you know, the industry pissing matches. They just make good stuff and listen to their customers. So the Rain 1.0 is great. Maybe someday I'll upgrade to the Rain 2.0. The only problem that I have with this light is this switch system here. So I could do a full review, but it has momentary, and then it also has constant on. So for me, after running 2 days at night, or 2 nights, you know, low light only, I realized that for the most part, I'm only going to be using constant on. So the switch system, I don't use the momentary, I use the constant on. But here's the other problem, is as I'm shooting, if I make any contact, the lightest little bit of contact with the constant on switch, and the light flickers. I don't know if on the second version they've gotten rid of that, but if my hand moved back at all as I was shooting and touched that, my light would be flickering. Now, if I hit the momentary, nothing happens. So I have it set where the constant on is in the back and the momentary is up front. And then I've got my my mod button for the PEC up here so that I can figure out which one I want to use. So moving the buttons around did help, but having that clicky button that when you barely touch it, the light flickers is a bummer for me. So I'm going to be having to go through and look at my light setup a little bit more in detail. So after all that, you might be asking yourself, who gives a shit about this guy's setup? And that's a very fair question. The answer is I do. And I just wanted to walk through the process and understand that learning how to find a setup that is ideal for you, that you've trusted and vetted, doesn't just happen at the range. I would highly recommend going to courses with instructors that are well vetted and have a really good reputation in the industry, and try a lot of different things. Because I could have run no problem with that LPVO and red dot offset on the flat range for a long time. It wasn't until I spent 3 days, 8 hours a day lugging the gun around, that I realized it was not going to work out. Same thing with the ACSS reticle. I loved it. I swore by it until I shot a lot at night. Shooting a little bit's fine, but when I had to shoot a lot and to standards and with the pressure of people looking at me, everything changed. So don't think that there is a perfect setup for everything, and don't think that the first setup that you go with is perfect. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of trial and error to find out what works best for you. But for me, this is my current setup. Once I work on the light situation, it may be my final setup if I don't find a light and button combination along with company ethos that I really, really enjoy. So yeah, 1911 Syndicate, good whiskey, Type A, good guns. Spend the money and the time to train with them, and you'll find out what your go-to setup is really like.